Hey, what's up, family? This is Marseille, aka the Property Pastor, here with Kingdom Legacy Builders, where our mission is to help everyday people like you and me to build a lasting legacy for their children and their children's children using real estate investing and wealth building principles. You know, Proverbs 13:22, it says that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. And here at Kingdom Legacy Builders, we're here to show you all about how to build a strong portfolio through real estate investing, how to use wealth building principles. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about real estate. We're going to be talking about, how do you collect rent from tenants? And I want to explain, the pros and cons of a whole lot of different methods, from cash to personal checks to money orders to electronic methods. And one of the things about collecting rent is that as a real estate investor, you need to pay your bills, right? And you want to be able to get your rent in a reliable way, right? You don't want to have to chase checks all over town. So in this video, we're going to be talking all about how do you collect rent. What are the methods? What are some of the pros and some of the cons of it? But before we get started, I want to ask you guys to make sure that you like and subscribe to this video, like and subscribe to this channel, because we're dropping new content every single week to help you along in your journey, to help you build that legacy. So to all of our Kingdom Legacy family, we're glad that you're here. If this is your first time on the channel, I thank you for joining us for today's video. And before we get started, I want you to drop some comments, drop some what you do in your business. So let us know. So before we get started, I want you to drop in the comment section how you're collecting rent in your business, what's working for you, what's not working for you. So also, make sure that you leave your questions and your comments. I'm here to be your virtual mentor, and I'm here to help you along that journey. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first currency that we're going to talk about, or the first method of collection, is cash. Right, cash money is the universal currency. Everyone loves to have it. But when in terms of accepting cash, one of the things as a real estate investor, as a landlord, or even as a property manager, collecting cash can be good because it's available right away. It can be spent right away, but it also has some downsides, right? One of the downsides to collecting cash is that you got to go pick it up most times, right? You got to actually meet that person to pick it up. And really, if you have multiple properties that you're working with, walking around with a big wad of cash is not safe. I have heard stories from other investors of, back in the day when they would go and collect rent on the first or whatever that was for them, they go around and collect cash, and they could be walking around with $2,000, $3,000, upwards of $5,000 at any given time, and that's an easy target, and the tenants themselves could even set, the landlord or property manager up and say, hey, this guy, we know he carries a lot of cash on rent collection day, and it becomes a safety issue, right? So carrying cash, even though it's available right away to spend, right, it's not always, the most secure and the most convenient. The other thing we want to talk about is personal checks, right? So accepting personal checks is convenient in that you don't have to carry that cash around, right? And you may decide to go and pick that cash up. You may decide to have the tenant mail it in, right? But in terms of a personal check, it is good because it's more secure than cash. But one of the drawbacks of it is that a person can write a bad check. People write bad checks all the time. And one of the drawbacks of writing a bad check, right, is that you have to, there's a bad check fee. So a tenant may decide to write you a personal check, but not have the funds to back it up. So not only are you going to have to go, you may have to go pick that source of funds up, but then on top of it, that particular source of fund, they may have written you a bad check. So now your bank's going to charge you $25, $35, and now you got to go and try to recoup that from the tenant. I've had that happen before, and so that's one of the reasons that I don't accept personal checks for the most part. The other thing, though, is money orders, right? So you can get a personal check, but the other thing you can get is a money order. So if a tenant doesn't have a savings account or checking account that has check writing privileges, they can go down to their 7-Eleven, they can go down to the post office and actually buy a money order. So for a small fee, they can drop the cash off with and purchase a money order, make it out to you as a landlord, and then you can deposit that money. So from the good side is that money you don't have to worry about a bad check anymore. But on the negative side, that one of the cons of a money order is that the tenant now has to go in and take care of that. So sometimes tenants, they want things to be easy, right? They don't want to necessarily have to go to the store, right? They don't have to make that extra trip. They would much rather just call you up and say, hey, here's your money, come pick it up, right? So on the positive side, you don't have to worry about bad checks, but on the negative side, your tenant, your tenant's going to have to go and actually purchase that money order, which they may or may not like to do. Now, I personally like money orders, because we do have some tenants in our portfolio who don't have they don't have checks, they don't have cash. I mean, well, we don't accept cash in our business, but for them, a money order, we will accept a money order because we know that they've already paid for it. It's secure. We know that money order is always going to clear. Now, on the negative side, though, right, that money order, you still got to go and take it to the bank, right? So that's going to be this issue with checks, and it's going to be the issue with money orders. The last area that we want to cover in terms of ways that money can come in is electronically, right? So we're blessed with technology nowadays that a tenant, if they've got a checking account or if they got a debit card and whatnot, they can actually wire that money to you. They can wire that money, or they can, if they've got Cashapp, if they got Venmo, they got PayPal, if they got Zelle, all of these methods are ways that they can pretty much electronically transfer money to you as a property manager or landlord. Additionally, there are a ton of different services out there like Cozy that you can actually do rent collection through. There's like a whole bunch of different websites that services that actually collect money electronically, and they deposit that into your account. Now, from a convenience side, you cannot beat electronic funds, right? Those electronic funds will basically get transferred to your account. You never have to go to the bank, right? All you do is do that initial setup of the tenant, just depending on the service, right? There may be a ACH transfer, or it might just be transactional each and every time, right? But the nice part about it is that you never have to leave the comfort of your home or the comfort of your office to collect rent, which is nice because that will hit your account. The only real con to me for these kind of payments is the amount of time that it takes. And really, that's not necessarily a big con, because if you have a check that you're depositing, you still have a certain amount of time in many cases to wait for that to clear. But I have seen that with electronic services, it can take anywhere from 2 to 7 days to get that money to actually clear. Now, depending on what kind of service you opt into, you can pretty much get that money the same day or the very next day with these services at a small fee. All right, so those are just some quick methods some quick ways or types of currency that you can collect. So my two favorite types of payment are electronic payments and money orders. And the reason that I like those two is electronic payment, they come pretty much directly to my checking account, and I never have to leave, right? So that tenant is already set up. I get that electronic payment. So that's absolutely my favorite type. So all of my property management is set up that way for the most part, except for tenants who can't do it, right? So the other thing is if I can't get electronic payment, I go with money orders. So if a tenant has to do money orders, then I prefer, if they can't do Cashapp, they can't do Cozy, right? Some of the things that we have set up, then we'll have them mail into us a money order. So we're going to talk about what that system kind of looks like, because it's worked very well for me and my business for the past 3 years. But like I said, my favorites are electronic payment and money orders. I don't like personal checks because the check can bounce, and I don't like cash because I just don't like walking around or riding around with thousands of dollars in my pocket. It's just not safe. And I still got to go to the bank anyway, because for accounting purposes, I want that money to be in my account so I can track where it's actually going. But I also want to talk about some of the methods of rent collection. In other words, what are some of the best ways that you can actually collect rent? So now we're going to cover 4 ways of actually collecting the rent. So we've got to decide if we're going to collect cash, we're going to take checks, we're going to take money order, or if we're going to do it electronically. But now I want to talk about 4 different methods of actually collecting the rent. The first one is in person, right? And now in person can be good, but it's got probably more negative aspects than it has positive. So on the positive side, some of the pros of collecting rent in person is that if you meet at the property, it guarantees that you're going to see the property. So one of the issues about, if you go and you actually pick it up, it's going to be there, when you got the money, but you can also take a look at the property itself when you go in. But on the negative side, right, if you have more than one tenant, if you got multiple properties, it is highly inefficient to go to each property. And if you got a multifamily property, if on the first you go around and you collect, checks from tenants on certain units on the first, and then, if you got a grace period up to the 5th, every single day you could be going to properties trying to collect rent. That can be very frustrating, and it's just not a good use of time, right? So it's not a good use of time to do what I like to call chase checks. And tenants, if they know you're going to come, they may tell you I got it on the first, and then you get there on the first and they're not there. You got to come back and all that kind of stuff. So doing it in person, I think, has definitely more cons than it has pros. Now, I don't know what's worked for you in your business, but if you're going in person and actually doing it, let us know what works for you there. But in addition to doing it in person, there's also an envelope system. And I like the envelope system. And this is one thing I actually want to kind of explain to you guys, because in the envelope system, what I do with some of my tenants is I provide an invoice. Right. So my property manager will go out and they will essentially take an invoice and it'll show the tenant, what they owe. Then in addition, there is a self-addressed envelope, and then there is an envelope for to actually deliver the whole package. Right, so we don't use we don't put stamps on the self-addressed envelope. But what all a tenant does is they have to take a money order or they have to take a check, and they basically put that into the self-addressed envelope and they mail it to our PO box. Right, I highly recommend you don't use your personal address if you do that. If you use a mailing system, right? But in doing it, what happens is we kind of train and condition the tenants to know that this has to be postmarked by the fifth of the month, which is after the fifth we charge late fees. But they basically just take their check or money order, and typically money orders, right? And they drop it in the self-addressed envelope, put a stamp on it, put it in the mail, and they're done. So their real trip is just to go and purchase that money order if they need it. Remember, my favorite rent collection type is electronic or money order. So if they're doing a money order, right, we provide that self-addressed envelope, and then they just put it in there and they send it to us, and it comes straight to our PO box. Works very well for older tenants or tenants who are not as accustomed to using technology, and it saves us a trip. Right, when I first started my first property, I worked with the existing property manager, and he was chasing checks, and I told him, I said, hey, I don't want you to do that. I want to change over to this method. And in doing it, rent was coming in on time. We didn't have to go and chase checks. A lot of just the headache and hustle and bustle and inefficiency went away really quickly for tenants who did not have electronic payment ability. Additionally, right, so like I mentioned, electronic is my favorite way to go. So I'm going to kind of cover two main groups of electronic payment. The first group is just online methods. Now, from an online perspective, there's services like Cozy and different rent collection services out there. There's tons of them out there. There's rentredi, all these different services that a tenant can go into an electronic system, type in their bank account information, and then that money can either be auto drafted or manually transferred each and every month. Right, and that is phenomenal because what happens is that you as a landlord are not chasing checks. You're getting funds that are pretty much guaranteed and secure, and you don't have to go and actually go pick that up. You don't have to make a trip to your PO box. And I love it when I get alerts, as a Cashapp has been sent, or here's an alert from Cozy and whatnot. So online is a phenomenal method. Most property management companies have migrated over to it, but there are going to be some tenants who just don't trust that system. They don't want to do electronic, and that's really the only con of this kind of thing is that the tenant typically needs to have a checking account or a debit card or credit card that they can actually link to that Cozy system or rent collection system. One other con that I have seen is just the cost of some systems. Many systems are free, like Cozy has a free version, which I love, and we'll do a review of Cozy just for everybody who's considering it. But one of the nice parts about it is it's easy to set up. It's going to be there, but the only real con that I see out of it is just the time it takes to transfer the money to your account. So by the time a tenant may pay on the first, but it may take 2 or 3 days, sometimes even up to 5, depending on just this transfer setup and how that service works. You can always pay additional money to get that money transferred earlier, but it could take a little bit longer just depending on the service. I have seen services where a tenant can actually go to a 7-Eleven and pay that money, and then that money will get transferred from 7-Eleven over to me. But what I found with those kind of services, I think it's one called rentredi, but I looked into a service like that, and what I found was that the cost of setup or the entry fee was just so high. Right, it was like $500 just to set up, and I had to have a certain number of tenants. So my portfolio, I have about 30 doors right now, so it just wasn't cost effective for me. But that is another thing to consider. If you got an apartment complex and a tenant doesn't have electronic payment, they can run over to 7-Eleven and essentially give the information. They pay 7-Eleven cash. 7-Eleven transfers that money to you. Right, so there's a lot of online methods that work really well. The last one is app-based types of electronic payment, and that's going to be Cashapp, that's going to be Zelle, right? That's going to be PayPal, it's going to be Venmo, right? And we use all of those services because they just allow a very simple and clean method for our tenants to pay rent and for us to get that rent very quickly, right? When it comes down to Cashapp, it typically takes us about 2 days to get those funds. That's very convenient, right? So that is extremely convenient for both our tenants and for us as the owners to collect rent. So in it, right, those are phenomenal ways. So that's probably my favorite is just Cashapp and Zelle and those kind of things. So I really like those. But the only drawback really is for the tenant. If the tenant doesn't have, they're just not good with their smartphone. If you got an older tenant, and your property manager has to walk them through it, A lot of those folks are just old school, right? So it's just not easy for them. But as a manager, as a landlord, app-based and electronic payment methods are the way to go. They're definitely the way to go, and they work phenomenally. But I would say in closing, as you look at it, you might be saying, well, what should I pick? What is the best method? What I would say is two principles I think that really make sense are you want to make the process as easy as you can for yourself and for the tenant, because you've got bills to pay, right? You can't be wondering about whether or not that money is coming in. You may have a mortgage to pay. You have property management fees to pay, utilities, all the stuff, right? You don't want to have to worry about whether or not your rent is coming in. You want it to be a seamless, reliable process. So I would say you definitely want to make that as easy as possible for both yourself and for your tenant. Now, we offer multiple ways for our tenants to pay rent, right? Because the thing about it is you got to kind of, everybody's situation is a little bit different, right? I think you need to be fair, but be firm, right? And what I mean by that is if you're in a situation where your tenant only wants to pay you cash, right? You've got to start to transition them over to your system and let them know that, hey, this is the way we're doing this, and this is why we need to do it. We can't be out here, chasing checks every single day. We've got to set up systems and things like that. But you got to work with your tenants, right? But work towards getting a system that works for both sides, right? And that's why we offer multiple opportunities for them to pay their rent. Like I said, we don't take cash, right? Because cash is just not safe, and it's another thing where it's just too many things that can go wrong with cash, and we've got to actually go out to the property. That's what, and I mentioned that it's a benefit of going to the property, but we just do inspections for that, right? So cash, I would say, is definitely not the way to go. But in it, when it's all said and done, you want to make it as easy as possible for yourself and for the tenant. And you want to be firm, but you also want to be fair. Well, I want to thank you for tuning into today's video as we talked all about how to collect rent. We covered the multiple types of currency. We also covered some of the collection methods. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear your comments, your questions. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel. We're dropping new content every single week, right? And I pray nothing but God's best upon you. Stay safe during the pandemic. Love you guys. Can't wait to see you again soon. Thanks again for tuning in. God bless.